So this water butt developed a leak right down here. It's split in the plastic. It's pretty much irretrievable. So I've decided I'm going to cut it in half, which gives me two containers. One that I can use open-ended, I think for carrots, and the other one will just be like a very large pot. So I need to cut it right down the center, and for that I'm going to use my reciprocal saw and see how I get on. Wow, that certainly made light work of that. So now I've got one open-ended carrot pot and one with a bottom on, but I can undo this tap, and that always makes sure that I've got some drainage. If I need any additional drainage, I can make some holes in the bottom. The plan here is to use this half of the water butt as a pot. It's got one drainage hole, and to fill it up, I don't know, 75% of the way, and then to move some of the perennial kale out of the existing bed that it's in and into this. Now we find that 1,000 head kale, which is very prolific, to be just a little bit tough to eat as a kale. So one thing that we do know is that the chickens love it. So the plan is to move some of that perennial kale into here, and then we can feed the chickens with it on a regular basis. The challenge I've got is finding enough soil for this pot. I don't want to use compost. The little I've got left is now needed for the tomatoes. So any other way I can, I'm going to be adding soil to this until I get up to about there, and then we'll move the cow. So in my search for compost for the kale pot, I'm going to resort to this 3-year-old chicken bedding, which actually is really good stuff, and I'll mix that up with what I've already put in there, and that should top off what we need and give them a good chance. I'm definitely not making enough of the 2 wormeries that I've got. I stick them into the compost area, and to be honest, I forget about them too often. So I've decided I'm going to rake this square out and bring them out, pop them onto a couple of pallets, and start feeding them and looking after them properly. So I'm just going to rake this clear, get myself a decent surface, and move them out. So this isn't something I know an awful lot about, but I can see there was an awful lot of worm cocoons in those worm bins. So I've mixed that up in layers with kitchen waste that I've been storing up and made sure it's nice and moist, and hopefully they will multiply and eat through all that waste, and we should get some good worm casts. And of course, so one of the byproducts of sorting all that out was a little bit more good quality compost, which I'm going to put in that water bath. My plan of transplanting one or two of these 1,000 head kales is going to be quite challenging. As you can see, the stems are hugely long, they were never staked up, and I'm not sure how they're going to stand up in that pot. I'm clearly going to have to support them in some way, but we'll try and see how we get on. Whoa, hold on, that doesn't work. Reverse. Joking aside, that really was not a very good idea, moving a perennial kale with a stem that thick. Just not going to work out, I don't think. So plan B is add a little bit of finer compost on top, just to go over the surface, and then start again with some seeds. So this is the same cottager's 1,000 headed kale, and these seeds, they're a little old, but as I've proven with my tomato seeds that were 4 years old, age doesn't have to be a barrier when it comes to seeds. You might not get complete germination, but there's no reason why you can't get some germination. Definitely need smaller thumbs to get in these little bags. So there we are. I'm going to put in a handful of these, and then as they germinate I can pick them out and decide which plants I want to keep. There we are. Just brush it over a little, give it a water, and we'll have another crack. If at first you don't succeed, try again. So that was only really about 5-10 minutes worth of work, and it's produced all that material that will be good for making a feed. And also, getting down that close, I was able to see that there's quite a lot of bramble runners coming up, and I need to take those off with secateurs on another day. But I also took the heads off of a lot of couch grass. So it was very productive, and it just goes to show how getting down and close to your plants really helps. So this is where I've decided I'm going to have the other half of the water butt with the carrots in. So I just need to get this bit of space level. It's reasonably clear underneath, and then I can place it. So I'm going to put a bit of membrane down first, make sure I don't have any weeds coming up through the centre. And then my only problem is finding more compost, and we'll do that however we can. Fortunately for me, Mrs. K is rearranging the pots in the back garden, and all the pots that she's finished with, I've acquired the spent compost, and that's what I'm going to sieve and put into this carrot tub, and it's got a good chance of doing well. So that's got the butt nearly filled to the level I want it. I'd like to see it about here, so just a short way to go. There's definitely some pests in that soil. I just got to hope that they're not going to impact on the carrots, but it's got two chances. So with the weather being a bit cooler, it's ideal for sowing these carrots. The carrot I'm going to sow is early 02. It can be sown outdoors from March through to July and harvested from July through to December, depending upon when you sowed it. I'm going to scatter these broadly across this, and then it says you can thin them to about 4 inches apart, and obviously that helps to get a thicker and longer carrot, or you could leave them and just get bunches of smaller ones. So the seed in here is pretty fine, as all carrot seed is. There's quite a lot of it, and I'm going to sow it all and just give it a really good spread around the soil surface, and this will require a watering in afterwards, and they will just brush the soil lightly to get those seeds to go into the soil. Take out any big bits that we don't really want, and then I'll probably put just a small layer of compost on top just to cover them up. So we'll put that layer of compost over the top, just very fine, small amount, just to cover the seed. Give it a good start. There we go. And then we'll water that in, and that's a job done. Looking at the weather forecast for the next couple of weeks, there's no sign of frost. So I've been tempted to take one of each plant that I've got in the house, in the propagator, and bring them over to the polytunnel and see if they can weather the cooler nights. Now, to do this you need to have a few spare plants, which I've got, and of course if they succeed, that's great, because it means you've got a few with an early start. If they don't succeed, well, no huge loss if you've got plenty of backup. Now, over on the propagator, I've turned the temperature down to just room temperature for the last couple of weeks. Otherwise the plants get a bit leggy. And over here it's going to be experiment time. So what we've got is one of the small sugar pumpkins, one of each of the Mrs. Green Thumb's Tomato Challenge. Now, if you remember, this seed was 4 years old, and I've been amazed. I had 5 or 6 germinations of each different type of seed. So that's fantastic news, and these are young seedlings, so it'll be interesting to see whether they cope with the cooler nights. We've got a money maker from over in the propagator, and that one's fairly slow growing, so you can tell it's been inside. It's a real pale green. If we compare it with these that germinated in the polytunnel, you can see they're much darker and they're already thickening up and becoming a hardier plant. So there are some benefits if you can get them to germinate in the polytunnel. We've got 3 Crimson Crush, and we've got plenty of those back in the propagator, so It'd be interesting to see how they fare. And this is courgettes, and we've got some courgette germination in the polytunnel, these 3 here, and they're obviously going to be hardy, and they're looking like they're growing really well. But these are much further on, and we'll just see whether they survive. And then I've brought across one of the pots of lavender just to see if that can green up and become acclimatized to the cooler conditions. So a bit of experimentation, and no loss if it doesn't work, and some gains if it does. So it's been a long old journey from November through to April. I sowed a lot of these seeds in November indoors, and we're now in April and we're just getting to planting them out. And these are one of the first seeds and plants that I plant out because they're more tolerant of the cold weather. And if you remember, we had different approaches to sowing the various onions, and we were trying to aim to see what the differences were in the impact of growing indoors, outdoors, and in root trays and normal pots. So first of all, let me show you the zebrune, which is a shallot sown in these deep root cells, and there's no doubt about it, indoors in those root cells, it's an absolutely fantastic solution for bringing onions on. Zebrune, which was sown outdoors, is here. Now they've done quite well. They're small plants, but clearly not as well as in those deep root trays. The other thing that's noticeable, these were clusters of 6 or 7 seeds, and there's 2 in one and 1 in the other, so the survival rate is pretty low when they're sown outdoors. This is Elsa Craig outdoors, and there's 4 in one and 1 in the other. I lost 1 pot of seedlings altogether, and Elsa Craig in these pots indoors was not a lot different. So I'd say these were probably best sown outdoors. And then there's the Rheinsberger, which is a long keeping onion, and this is the medium root trays, sown indoors, looking quite well. And here we have the ones that were sown outdoors in the polytunnel, and they've come on well, but they're that much smaller. So I think on balance, I would say growing onions indoors early is certainly a successful method. But sometimes it pays to do both, and then you get 2 bites of the cherry. At least that's my approach, I think, in the future. And we'll get on and start planting these into this bed. So I've chosen this bed because it's got high hoops. Last year I grew it on the lower hoops, and the zebrune hit the tops of the netting, and that started to bend them all over and it got quite messy. So I'm going to grow them in this high hoop bed. I had a few spring onions in here last year. Otherwise it was a combination of some celeriac and some kale, so it's been a real mixed bed. One of the benefits of a no-dig approach, as long as you lay new mulch over the top, it has no real negative impact sowing a crop a second year or even a third year in a row. And if you have any doubts over that, have a look at Charles Dowding's trials, where I think he proves conclusively that that's the case. Now we've got really good root growth on these plants. Tease them out. You can see they're nice and strong. There's 3 or 4 in this one. I'm finding the dibber is not going down deep enough, so I'm just going to use a trowel for a moment. What's interesting is this soil looks dry on the surface, but down here it's really nice and moist. I'm going to plant these bulbs so that they're just below the surface, And that is ideal. This really is one of the most enjoyable parts of gardening, putting your homegrown seeds and seedlings into the ground. Just look at that. So that's all the zebrune in, and that's nearly 50% of this onion bed to the shallots, which would be just marvellous. And there was mixed germination amongst there, so we've got some clusters, some singles, but that's fine. Whatever comes out, it's always good. So that's the full bed now planted up, and we have about a third of the bed over to zebrune shallot. We've got a third of the bed to the winter long-keeping onion Ryansburger, and then we've got a third of the bed to Ailsa Craig. I always keep the end of the bed about 8 inches free, because when the nets roll over, they sit there and that inhibits the growth. So it's best just not to plant into it. And now we just give it a good watering in. Now I'll give this a watering in straight after planting, but I'll also water it a couple of times during the course of today. It's that early change of environment that can shock the plants, and one thing that you can do is make sure that they've got enough water. Now, this bed was pretty moist underneath, but it never does the plants any harm. And the next step is to put a net over the top, just to prevent the cats from digging them up. So the net I'm going to put on this is an Enviro mesh, and it covers the full bed, and I'll show you my method of clamping it down. But effectively it's gathered at one end and cable tied, so that we get a closed end each side, and just cable tied to keep tidy, and hopefully it'll go over fairly simply. To keep it taut and to keep it down in the wind, I use these fairly cheap and cheerful clamps, but they do the job really well. It's important that you get a reasonable seal around the edges, because of course the butterflies and other insects will find their way in if you don't. So you can see how this gap at the front is quite important, and the edges I just have to keep an eye on, make sure that nothing gets in. This end seems to be quite secure, and I might end up having to put another rock along that edge. And inside now, it's just a case of waiting for everything to grow. You can always water through this without any problems at all. And this is quite a stiff netting, but extremely effective against insects. The first thing to do in this bed is prepare it, and we've got a few weeds to get out, and we've got a fair amount of the dreaded mare's tail, which I'm just going to loosen so I can get a good grip on it. You never actually get this mare's tail out completely, and if you can get a goodly amount of the root when you pull it out, then at least you give yourself a stay of execution and a bit more time. So just pull those out. There's a fair few in here, I have to say. There's a good root. There's another one there. And look at the size of that. And another one. Oh, there's a bit of couch grass in here as well. Let's see if we can get down a bit lower and get some of that out. There we go. Okay, so we're pretty clear then of mare's tail, and we've got to get these parsnips out. Their time has come, and I don't know whether there's going to be anything on here worth eating. No, tiny little root. I'm doing my best not to disturb the soil at the same time, because again, a tiny root, because that's the whole principle of no dig, that the soil is not turned over and not disturbed as much as you can anyway. So there we are, that's the bed reasonably well ready for this tranche of broad beans. And I'm going to sow them in a similar, or plant them in a similar vein to these, with about 8 inches, 12 inches apart. And these plants are in a fairly big pot now, beautiful root growth, and pop that straight in and give it a firm in, and there she goes. So there we are, another 3 rows of broad beans, a couple of very small ones, which we'll replace if we've got enough in the next sowing. So the last broad beans to go in here are the aquadulce that are my saved seed, and there'll be a week or 2 more before they're ready to go in. And then the hope is that we get a main cropping of beans from the early ones that we sowed, and then another hit and a final hit, and hopefully there's a little bit of succession between them. We'll wait and see. So it's time for a rearrange, see if I can get some more of these pots up off of this bed. Now that I've planted out the broad beans and some of the onions, or most of the onions, I've got a little bit of space and I can start releasing the bed down below. So it's rearrangement time. Mrs. K said she wants a handle because she finds it quite hard to close this. So I found these drawers that somebody'd thrown out into a back lane, and on the drawers were some rather nice handles. Recycle, reuse, why not? Job done. I do hope you enjoyed the video today. If you did, click the subscribe button, click the like button, and if you want updates from me each time I upload a video, click the bell and select all. I do hope you have a great day. Diolch yn fawr.